The green room at the Comedy Central Awards buzzed with nervous energy as two titans of late-night television sat across from each other, their usual friendly demeanor replaced by something far more competitive. Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his tie while Stephen Colbert cracked his knuckles, both men sizing each other up like prize fighters before a bout. It had started innocently enough 3 weeks ago during a charity event. A casual comment about audience engagement had snowballed into a full-blown rivalry that had consumed both men's thoughts and dominated entertainment news cycles. Tonight, surrounded by their peers, it was finally time to settle the score. "You know, Jimmy," Stephen began with that signature smirk, his voice carrying that theatrical quality that had made him a household name. "I've been thinking about our little discussion last week about who has the better audience." Jimmy shifted in his leather chair, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. "Discussion? Is that what we're calling your public meltdown on Twitter?" Stephen's eyes flashed dangerously. "Meltdown? I was simply articulating what everyone in this business already knows but is too polite to say." "Which is?" Jimmy's voice carried a warning edge. "That your audience is the entertainment equivalent of a golden retriever, enthusiastic, loyal, but ultimately satisfied by the simplest tricks." Stephen leaned back, clearly pleased with his analogy, while mine, well, let's just say they require a more sophisticated approach. Jimmy's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Sophisticated? Stephen, your viewers spend half their time fact-checking your jokes on their phones instead of actually enjoying them. They're so busy proving they get it that they forget to actually laugh." The room was beginning to fill with other comedians, writers, and industry insiders who had caught wind of the brewing confrontation. What had started as a private conversation was quickly becoming a very public spectacle. "At least they engage intellectually," Stephen continued, his voice gaining momentum. "My audience doesn't need spoon-feeding. They understand subtext. They appreciate the craft of comedy. They can follow complex political commentary without needing it broken down into digestible sound bites." "Engage intellectually." Jimmy stood up, his composure finally cracking. "They sit there like they're watching a documentary about humor instead of actually experiencing it. Your show has become a performance of comedy rather than actual comedy." The gathering crowd began to murmur, phones emerging from pockets as people realized they were witnessing something special. The energy in the room shifted from casual networking to electric anticipation. Stephen rose to meet Jimmy's challenge, his posture straightening into that familiar stance his viewers knew so well. Performance of comedy? That's rich coming from someone who thinks having celebrities read mean tweets constitutes groundbreaking television. Those mean tweets get more genuine laughs in 5 minutes than your monologue gets in a week. And you know why? Because my audience isn't afraid to let loose. They don't need to curate their laughter to match their LinkedIn profiles. "Your audience," Stephen said, drawing out each word with theatrical precision, "would laugh at a rubber chicken if you told them it was commentary on the absurdity of modern life. They're not discriminating. They're desperate for someone to tell them what's funny." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Several people in the crowd actually gasped, recognizing that Stephen had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Jimmy's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hurt, and then something far more dangerous. The calm that comes before a storm. Desperate? Jimmy repeated quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. You think my audience is desperate? Stephen, perhaps sensing he had pushed too far, but unable to back down now, doubled down. I think your audience has been conditioned to accept mediocrity dressed up as accessibility. They've forgotten that comedy can be both funny and smart. The room had gone completely silent now. 30+ people stood frozen, some with drinks halfway to their lips, others with their phones held high, all waiting to see how Jimmy would respond to what felt like a professional death blow. But instead of exploding, Jimmy smiled. It wasn't the practiced television smile he was famous for. It was something smaller, more genuine, and infinitely more dangerous. You know what, Stephen? Jimmy said, his voice returning to conversational levels, but somehow commanding more attention than when he was shouting. You're absolutely right about one thing. Stephen blinked, clearly not expecting this response. My audience does accept what I give them, but you know why? It's not because they're dumb or desperate or unsophisticated. It's because they trust me. Jimmy began to pace slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. They trust me enough to go on whatever journey I want to take them on. They don't need to understand every reference or catch every inside joke to know they're having a good time. They're not performing being an audience, they are an audience. Stephen opened his mouth to interject, but Jimmy held up a hand. And you want to know the most beautiful thing about that trust? It means I can surprise them. I can take them places they never expected to go. Your audience comes to your show knowing exactly what they're going to get. Validation of their existing beliefs, references that make them feel smart, jokes that confirm their worldview. My audience comes ready for anything. The crowd was leaning in now, sensing the shift in momentum. Stephen's confident posture had begun to waver. Case in point, Jimmy continued, his smile growing wider. I could walk out on my stage right now, say one word, just one word, and they'd lose their minds with joy. Not because they're simple, but because they understand that the best moments in comedy, in life, are the ones you never see coming. One word? Stephen managed, his theatrical confidence finally cracking. That's ridiculous. No audience is that responsive to pizza. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Jimmy let the word hang in the air for a long moment, watching as its power settled over the room like magic. Pizza, he repeated, his grin growing wider. I could walk on stage, interrupt my own monologue, and just say pizza. And you know what would happen? Stephen stood transfixed, along with everyone else in the room. They'd go absolutely insane, not because they're easily amused, but because they'd understand instantly that I just made them part of something special, an inside joke that didn't exist 5 seconds ago, a shared moment of beautiful absurdity that they'll remember forever and never be able to fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. Jimmy's voice was gaining strength now, fed by the energy of his own conviction. They'd cheer because they trust me enough to go on that ridiculous journey with me. They'd laugh because they know that sometimes the best comedy comes from the most unexpected places. They'd lose their minds because they're not afraid to let themselves feel joy without having to justify it intellectually first. Stephen's mouth opened and closed silently, his usual quick wit seemingly abandoned. "Your audience," Jimmy continued, now clearly in full control of the room, would spend the next 10 minutes analyzing whether pizza was a metaphor for American consumer culture or a critique of late-stage capitalism. They'd tweet about the subversive genius of deconstructed comedy. They'd write think pieces about the postmodern implications of single-word humor. Several people in the crowd were nodding along, completely caught up in Jimmy's momentum. But my audience, they'd just be happy. Happy that they got to share a weird, wonderful, completely inexplicable moment with someone they like. And isn't that what this whole business is supposed to be about? Making people happy? The room erupted. Not just applause, but actual cheering, with several people shouting "pizza," which only served to prove Jimmy's point in the most perfect way possible. Stephen stood there for a moment, his face cycling through disbelief, admiration, and something that looked almost like relief. Then, slowly, he began to clap. "That was—" Stephen started, then stopped, shaking his head with a rueful laugh. "That was actually brilliant and completely terrifying. You just turned a single word into a treatise on the nature of audience connection." The tension in the room evaporated like morning mist, replaced by the kind of electric excitement that comes after witnessing something truly special. Jimmy extended his hand, his competitive fire cooling into something warmer. "Look, Stephen, we're both trying to make people laugh. Maybe we just have different philosophies about how to get there." Stephen took the offered hand and shook it firmly, his grip betraying both respect and residual adrenaline. "Different philosophies is putting it mildly. You just weaponized the word pizza and somehow made me question everything I know about comedy. Want to grab some actual pizza and forget we tried to destroy each other's careers for 20 minutes? Jimmy asked, his television smile returning, but somehow more genuine than before. "Only if you promise never to use that level of psychological warfare on me again," Stephen replied, though he was grinning now too. "Seriously, where'd that come from? Years of trying to make people laugh when they don't expect it. Sometimes the best comedy happens in the spaces between the jokes." As they started toward the door, the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with excitement and repeating "pizza" to each other with increasing hilarity. But Stephen caught Jimmy's arm. "You know," Stephen said quietly, so only Jimmy could hear, "I may have been wrong about your audience, but I wasn't wrong about mine either. They do think. They do engage. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Jimmy nodded thoughtfully. "And maybe I was wrong too. Maybe there's room for both kinds of comedy. Maybe we need people who make audiences think and people who make them feel." "Or maybe," Stephen said with a return of his theatrical flair, "we just gave everyone the best show they'll see all night, and neither of us was wrong at all." They walked out together. The great late-night war finally ended, not with destruction, but with the kind of mutual respect that only comes from worthy opponents who've given everything they had. Behind them, someone shouted, "Pizza!" one final time, sending the remaining crowd into fresh peals of laughter, and proving that sometimes the simplest words can create the most lasting magic. The next morning, #Pizzagate would be trending on social media, with fans of both hosts sharing the story and arguing about the deeper meaning. But that night, In that moment, it was just two comedians who had rediscovered why they fell in love with making people laugh in the first place.